welcome everyone. It is great to see such a full house for this Knowledge Connect. And by way of introduction, I thought it would be useful to say a few words about our journey, that is Anna and my journey to SQ, or spiritual intelligence. And I've probably been trying to work with this topic and introduce this topic into the elements of the academic curriculum. Firstly at Sydney University, where I taught a course on spirituality and business in 2008, which was quite a novel course and successful course at the time. And then similarly since my time at Centre for Social Impact, have been through some of the publications of CSI, trying to introduce a topic which has traditionally not been a topic that's been discussed in the academy, where people have shied away from. And the other thing I should say is it's good to see so many familiar faces in the room, and many of you, I know I've had many conversations about this topic over coffee or lunch. But through the work at CSI, through my teaching, firstly on corporate responsibility, but then also a guest lecture that I do on the leadership course, I've been introducing some of these concepts. And one of the things that has been abundantly clear is that it's a topic that resonates strongly with students and with people that I talk to. And one of the things actually from the publications that I've done around spirituality is that I found that people, it's almost rightly or wrongly given people permission to speak about or feel comfortable to speak about these issues, rather than feeling like it's something that they don't talk about at particularly at a boardroom table or at business meetings or elsewhere. And the connection with Anna is that through that, the guest lecture on spiritual-based leadership, Anna happened to be doing that course at the time. She's now completed the graduate certificate, and in fact went on to top the leadership course. And it was something that deeply resonated with Anna, and she came to me afterwards and said, look, this was something that she wanted to do more work in and with, and we've been trying over the last 12 months, I guess, to look at ways that we can do this. And we thought that Knowledge Connect might be, I guess, the next step for this to happen, particularly at CSI, but also to start to give people a sense of what are some of the key works in this space, because it is a space that is now probably around at least 15 years in terms of some of the key and seminal writings that we talk about in the Knowledge Connect. So we felt it was time to be able to put together a Knowledge Connect to raise some of the key ideas that some of the giants in this field have been talking about, but also to bring it also to a practical level, okay? And to say that organisations or centres like the Centre for Social Impact, if we're involved in this kind of work, whether it's corporate responsibility, whether it's social impact, we feel that, as Marissa said, that it's time for IQ and EQ, as important as they are, to take a bit of a rest, and let's introduce and play with the notion of SQ. So we'll return to this in the conclusion, which we then hope to open it up and hear from you around some of your thoughts and comments around this topic. The Knowledge Connect itself, which I'm assuming that people have had an opportunity to look at, or if you haven't, that's fine. We're going to keep the brief discussion to really just covering what we've reviewed in it. We split it up into three main areas. The first one is really focusing on the conceptual elements. What is SQ? Who are the key people that have made a mark in this field? And so that's really providing the foundations for any further work or any further discussion that we need to have. The second area is around leadership. And it was a bit daunting for us to say, well, with an area as enormous and as huge as the leadership space is, how can we somehow choose, let alone talk about leadership in any meaningful way? And I should say also that the founders of SQ, so Dana Zohar and Ian Marshall and so on, their work was explicitly meant to deal with leadership, okay? But wasn't only about leadership. But since that time, particularly in the corporate responsibility and sustainability area, there's been a huge growth of literature, discussion, workshops around what's often referred to as either sustainable leadership or leadership for sustainability, and discussion around what those terms mean. Okay, so in other words, what does it mean to lead a truly responsible company? What are the kinds of attributes or traits that a leader of a leading corporate citizen needs to have? And so what we've done here is really, we've chosen to, which Anna will then speak to, key works that we feel really bring the SQ concepts to life in the leadership frame. And the third area is really around the notion of complex social problems or social impact. Okay? And it might seem a little bit strange. You might think, well, what does SQ or spirituality have to do with solving some of the tough, wicked problems, as they're often referred to? And in fact, that is, if you like, the essence of our argument and why we think it is so important to introduce SQ into the curriculum of educators that are involved in the social impact area. And that is because we feel that part of the reason for the intractable nature of trying to solve these problems is that it's the wrong type of intelligence that is often applied to these tough problems. Okay? So IQ and EQ are not enough, and we really need to start thinking about how we can use and apply SQ to some of these problems. And so the third part of Knowledge Connect is probably particularly valuable for those of you with a more practical bent that might be thinking, well, how do I use this stuff? How can I take this away and start to apply it to some of the issues that I'm confronted with in my organisations? And so the third part of Knowledge Connect looks at particular models and tools, very simple, but often profound in their implications, that are SQ inspired. Okay? Many of them don't actually use the word SQ, but they are in fact SQ models. And so we talk about examples of how they're applied in the workplace and how they're applied in the social sense. Before I go on, I often find with this topic, and particularly with SQ, I need to make some sort of early comments around spirituality. When we use the word spirituality, and when the people who've written the works that we review in Knowledge Connect use the word spirituality, they are not using it in the way that is sometimes thought of or confused with religion. Okay? They use it in a way that what I've referred to, or others have referred to, as a biological view of spirituality. And that is, we are all spiritual beings. It's part of the innate feature of being human, that we are spiritual. So it is something that is distinct from religion. And some people would argue that it's actually prior to religion. It's that innate spirituality that in some people and in some situations leads to the development of religion and religious institutions. So all the models, all the frameworks that are reviewed are what often referred to as faith neutral. Okay? Anyone can work with them. It's not about saying denigrating religion or saying spirituality is somehow superior to religion, but spirituality is used in this very different way. So you can use them in a secular way as well as in a way that is theist. And I'll illustrate that as we go on. And the other key thing, and this actually led to the title of the Knowledge Connect, is that in many ways, spirituality as it is used and talked about is about meaning and purpose. It is about our search for meaning. It's about we as people, what is it that gives us meaning? How do we make sense of the world? It's that search that is what we refer to, or what is referred to as spirituality in this context. And that provides one of the kind of first links to the key seminal work that we'll talk about, and that is if we are all spiritual, okay, in that sense that it is an innate trait, then some people have argued, well, some people might be more spiritually aware than others, okay, and it's led then to this notion of spiritual intelligence. And in Zohar and Marshall's book, they refer to it as the soul's intelligence, or the ultimate intelligence. So briefly, and this is page 4, so with some of the slides, those of you that do have the Knowledge Connect with you, if you want to and you feel like referring to the Knowledge Connect, it's the review that's on page 4. And Zohar and Marshall, they're a husband and wife team. Dana Zohar, who's got a very interesting background, partly as a quantum physicist, which she brings to her work, and Ian Marshall, who's a psychologist. And so you bring that combination together. And in fact, it was in 2000 that they wrote one of their first books on SQ. But the book that we reviewed was the one that I felt actually provides greater context and greater clarity to the SQ notion, which was the book Spiritual Capital, Wealth We Can Live By. And I guess the easiest way or the simplest way in the time that we have to understand or to think about spiritual intelligence and spiritual capital is to compare it to, as they do, other forms of capital that we're probably most familiar with. Okay, so we're all familiar with the notion of material capital. Okay, that is the physical wealth, and it's the IQ. Okay, it's that rational intelligence that is often used to deal with those kinds of issues. Okay, that's the intellectual intelligence that we use to solve problems, logical problems, or problems of strategy. The second type of capital, which again we'd all be familiar with, is that social capital. Okay, and EQ, again, that notion of emotional intelligence is something that was popularised by Daniel Goleman, okay, in the middle of the 90s. Again, it's this whole notion of do we have the intelligence to put ourselves in other people's shoes? Okay, are we able to empathise with others? How do we relate to others in terms of relationship? And then, of course, they build on that and say there's a third kind of capital, which is spiritual capital, and that is, and in order to build that spiritual capital, this is this reservoir of meaning, this reservoir of values that we as humanity need and drive. Okay, and in fact, one of the key points that they raise in the beginning of their book is Maslow's pyramid, which again we're all familiar with. But what they in fact argue is that Maslow's pyramid in Western societies at least needs to be inverted. Okay, so that the idea, remember, was that we're all taught that we have to satisfy these basic needs. Where in fact what they're arguing is it's now meaning that is actually driving what is important to drive a lot of our attitudes and behaviour. And again, Anna will come back to that when she talks about leadership. But in order to build this reservoir of spiritual capital, that's where we need spiritual intelligence. Okay, and this is the kind of intelligence that says, how do we access and tap into that deep meaning? Okay, what is it that gives us meaning and value? How do we address that? How do we tap into that kind of reservoir of meaning and value? And that's the official, well, not the official, but a formal definition there is SQ is the ability to access higher meanings, values and purposes, and those unconscious aspects of the self. Okay, so it's very much around that self-actualization, that self-awareness, and how do we then embed these values and these meanings in the work that we do, in the lives that we lead, and so on. And again, what they're arguing is that SQ is in fact an important type of intelligence for those other types of intelligence, IQ and EQ, okay, and physical intelligence, to function more effectively. And it can operate together with or independently of those other types of intelligence. Now, as I said, Zohar has a background in physics, and one of the things I don't have time to go into here, but for those of you that are interested in the new science and complexity theory in particular, one of the fascinating aspects of the book is their use of complexity theory to help develop what they then come up with, which is the 12 principles of spiritual intelligence. And each one of these principles they link back to the principles of complex adaptive systems. Okay, so the way that complex adaptive systems operate from that model, they then say these are the kinds of the 12 principles. And on page 4 of your Knowledge Connect, it just provides a brief sentence for each one of those principles. So for example, self-awareness is to know what I believe in and value what deeply motivates me. The principle of spontaneity, to live in and be responsive to the moment and all that it contains. Okay. Now, as I said, these principles sound, you might look at them and think, yeah, well, that's fairly common sense. And it's, in fact, this is one of the key insights as well from this Knowledge Connect, that many of these tools and frameworks are simple, but it's often in that deep simplicity that they can actually lead to profound change and transformation, which often much more complicated tools which rely on IQ and EQ don't often have the capacity to do. And so it's these 12 principles which then they look at what are the ways that, what are the kind of, if you like, the checklist, or what are the kinds of behaviours that relate to each one of these 12 principles. Now, as I said, Zohar and Marshall first wrote about this SQ in 2000, and it's slowly been taking interest in more and more people. But most recently, I guess, and what we wanted to do with this foundational part of Knowledge Connect is provide you with, as I said, Zohar and Marshall's work, which we see as almost the key start, and then Cindy Wigglesworth's work called, in her most recent book, SQ 21. And again, Wigglesworth was keen to say what are the building on that EQ work and believing in the whole SQ notion, saying how do we assess, okay, how do we know, how can we build the skills? If it is an intelligence, if SQ is an intelligence, then clearly there needs to be certain traits and elements that we can say, that we can get a sense of where we're at in that SQ spectrum. And so the work that she began in 2000, in fact at the same time that Zohar and Marshall published their first work, was to build and develop, as I said, what she refers to as the 21 skills of SQ, and broken down into these four quadrants. And the way that this you can think about this is that you need some of these skills. So for example, the skills in quadrant 1, okay, which are around the self, understanding ourself and the difference between our ego self and the higher self, often need, in order to then have a greater sense of universal awareness, but also then to have mastery of our ego self and higher self. And if you like, the quadrant 4, okay, this is the kind of the mastered, if you've mastered SQ, which very few people have, apart from some exceptional leaders, would be, you would score in this kind of area. And what Cindy Wigglesworth has done over this period is develop a very sophisticated tool that you can take as a survey tool that gives you a sense of where you are in terms of these different 21 skills. Okay, so it's not about saying that it's not a competition and saying you know you're better than me and so on, but it's about giving you as an individual, as a leader, an understanding of what are the areas that you might need to develop more so than others. So her idea was to say, well, if these are the traits that we require, and then what are the practices that we need in order to improve some of those traits. And the third part of her book, in fact, then starts to provide practices that we can undertake to develop different aspects of our, or develop aspects of these particular skills. And just to give you an example of what that might look like, so each of these 21 skills are broken down into 5 different levels. So 1 being a novice, for example, and 5 being that you're quite in that master area, that you've mastered or close to mastered that particular skill. So this is skill number 5, for example, which is the awareness of ego self or higher self, which is this one over here in that first quadrant. And so for that particular skill, okay, you've got this kind of list saying a very basic level. I have a basic understanding that an ego self exists, for example, and how it reacts to things, versus 5 being the other level of that, saying that the voice of my higher self is now the principal voice that I hear, and so on. Okay? And there's no longer that dualistic battle between the ego self and the higher self. So again, just to give you a flavour of the work, and in some ways, I guess, why we've chosen these 2 is because it shows, rightly or wrongly, what I believe is starting to be a greater mainstreaming of the SQ concept with this kind of work, which is around measuring and trying to understand your level of SQ, and then moving on from that and saying, then how do we actually cultivate it? Okay, what are some of the practices that we need to put that into practice? Okay, so that then leaves me to, as I said, one of the areas of Knowledge Connect, and one of the key areas where the whole notion of SQ has been applied, and that's leadership. So I'll just hand over to Anna.
I think it's actually quite appropriate, as it turns out, that the Knowledge Connect was held today. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, actually landed in Sydney today. I don't know if he has landed yet or is about to, but when we think about spiritual and leadership, I think that's probably one of those global spiritual leaders that sort of come to mind when we think about this area. Now, in terms of why we're looking at leadership and this spiritual intelligence, well, in terms of the Knowledge Connect, I mean, what CSI is really looking at doing is how to really construct the most, beneficial social impact possible. And so what we can see from looking at this literature is that there is a use with spiritual intelligence. It can actually provide perhaps a pathway to incorporate it into leadership to actually get better social impact and sustainability outcomes. So what I'm going to do, we looked at two pieces of literature in the Knowledge Connect, the Lewis Fry model, and also some work which Barrett Brown did around sustainability leaders, like some of the elements and features of great sustainability leaders. I'll focus actually on the Fry work, but I might actually just pull in some comments about Brown as well. Firstly, I just want to mention why. Why is there such an interest? And like Gianni mentioned at the start, about meaning and purpose, and it's true, a lot of conversations that you have with people, when you're talking about meaning and purpose, people's eyes light up and they're really engaged in the conversation. So I don't know if there's like a greater level of consciousness happening in society, but there are a lot of conversations and people are trying to work out how do we find meaning and purpose in our life. So the interest, I think, is coming from one of those areas. There's this personal need that we all have, this innate sense of, from our spiritual sense, I guess, of wanting to get meaning and a sense of purpose from what we do, from our work. We spend a lot of time in the workplace, so we look to the workplace largely to actually get that sense of meaning and purpose. And so when we actually come to work, as you would know, we bring all our things with us. We bring our needs, and so that includes our spiritual needs. So we don't leave our search for meaning and purpose at the door of the office. We bring them into the workplace. Now, balancing against that is the organisational needs. So the organisation itself really needs to sort of develop a business model which will actually look to enrich the lives of stakeholders and people, as well as being financially sustainable. So that's the challenge that in a lot of conversations and organisations are really having, is how to find that balance where we're looking after our staff, we're still able to be financially profitable, etc. So it's interesting. What I'll do is actually use, I didn't put it up on the slide here, but I've got Lewis Fry's definition on what is spiritual leadership. So I'll just actually quote him directly. He says that it basically involves intrinsically motivating and inspiring workers through hope, faith, in a vision of service to key stakeholders and a corporate culture based on altruistic love. So I've used some words in that definition which probably make people feel a bit uncomfortable, but I'll explore these components on the next slide. In a nutshell, that's the bird's eye view of the Fry model. Now, Fry and his colleagues have actually been researching and testing this model for about 12 years. And they've actually, in the book that we reviewed, there's actually a lot of case studies. They talk about a lot of corporations, largely drawn from the US and the UK, where organisations have actually used this model or components of this type of model. And he talks about all the outcomes that have originated, be it personal outcomes in terms of employee well-being, and also organisational outcomes. But I'll sort of work through the model. It's a bit hard in just a few minutes to go through it, but I'll see what we can do. The first part, well, I guess there's four main elements. There's in the middle there, in the purple box, the inner life, the spiritual practice. Now that basically sits at the heart of the whole model. So what Fry is saying is one really needs to cultivate that. And that really gives rise to spiritual leadership, and then moves on to spiritual well-being, and also the personal or individual and organisational outcomes, which Fry actually uses the triple bottom line construct to really describe what those outcomes look like. So if we just go back to the left-hand side model for a moment, the inner life and spiritual practice. So Fry is saying, look, to really even get started on this journey, you really can't do that without actually cultivating that inner life. And so here we're sort of looking at all the reflective modalities, be it meditation or reflective journaling, yoga, spending time in nature, whatever it is. But he's saying to actually get started on this journey, you need to really start in that box. And once you've done that, it'll actually lead on to a few things. You'll be able to develop a vision, and the vision that he speaks to in this model is about developing a vision of service to stakeholders. So it's really coming back, and it sort of really goes back to Fry's background, coming from a leadership area and servant leadership. But he's saying, well, look, you really need to have that vision of being of service to key stakeholders. And you also will develop from cultivating that inner life, that hope and faith, which basically gives you, the courage and the strength that you think, yes, I can see the vision and I believe that I can make this happen. But it's also grounded in altruistic love, in that red box over there. And he has a table in the book, which there's a lot of values involved in that, but I'll actually read out his definition because we don't actually hear the word love used much in the workplace. And so it's basically about caring and care and concern for yourself and others, but I'll want to stick to his quote. He says, "It's a sense of wholeness, harmony and well-being produced through care, concern and appreciation for self and others." So it's really about producing a workplace which is full of care and concern for yourself and also your fellow beings. So he has that, and what we end up seeing on the left-hand side of the model is basically intrinsic motivation at work. So those of you from that leadership background in terms of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, we're seeing there this circle where the vision is really the performance. The reward that you get in that circle is the altruistic love. You're actually feeling cared for in the workplace, and the hope and faith really is the effort that you're putting in to achieve that vision. So you get this intrinsic motivation circle happening on the left-hand side of the model, and that gives rise to spiritual leadership. Now, flowing on from that, in terms of spiritual well-being, the next step, what he's saying in the model is that if you have that vision of service to stakeholders, it will actually give rise to calling to people in the organisation, to yourself. And some of you are probably familiar with calling, but basically it's about making a difference, having a sense that your life has meaning and purpose. And together, if your culture in the organisation has the values of love, of altruistic love as he defines it, there's a sense of membership, that sense of belonging, which again, people feel like they want to belong, to a workplace. So if you have that culture of altruistic love, you'll feel understood, appreciated, you'll feel like you'll actually belong in the workplace. And so with those two things together, it gives rise to spiritual well-being. And so Fry's model then goes on to say, if you have spiritual well-being operating, it'll give rise to personal and organisational outcomes. So I've got some listed in the box there. So we'll have organisational commitment, productivity, financial performance, employee life satisfaction, and also corporate social responsibility, the whole CSR side. In summary, I guess, what he's trying to do with this model is really sort of, he advocates for the creation of a learning organisation. So those of you familiar with Peter Senge's work in that area, this is really what he's coming up with his model based around intrinsic motivation to create this learning organisation. And what he says in the book, or what they say, I should say, in the book, is that they're just, given the challenges we have in society in terms of our tough social problems, our sustainability challenges, they're sort of saying we really need to create an organisation which is able to really address those more effectively than what's happening at the moment. And so with the case studies he presents, they really say, look, this stuff actually works. So I just wanted to spend a minute or two just explaining his I guess, how he talks about the triple bottom line. Those of you who know from that sustainability background, it's basically people, planet, profit. So he frames the outcomes in that way. So at the heart we have spiritual leadership, and the main first outcome that comes out of that is for people. So there's research that's quoted, say for the last 20 years, which shows there's a positive relationship between spirituality and employee well-being. And when I talk about employee well-being or employee health, sorry, not employee, but personal health and so on, it's physical health. There's physical health improvements if you have, that spiritual well-being. There's also mental health benefits, and also overall life satisfaction. So what he says with the model, if you can achieve that overall life satisfaction with people in your workplace, that will actually then drive the other outcomes you'll get in the planet sphere and also the profit sphere. But you need to start with your people first. So if we look at the planet side, he talks about corporate social responsibility. Now, CSR is really grounded in stakeholder theory, so it's no surprise in a way that if you have this vision of service to stakeholders, etc., that you should get increased CSR. So he's saying, yes, if you have that vision that, yes, we do care about our stakeholders more broadly than just, the financial bottom line of the organisation, that the organisation itself will actually be more socially responsible. And he also goes on to say with this model that when employees have belonging and calling, that the organisation will actually be more successful in actually meeting stakeholder expectations, which includes sustainability expectations and goals as well. Then with the profit side, as I said a few moments ago, the whole employee life satisfaction actually drives the profit side, because a lot of the profit outcomes actually stems from the employee side of things. So up the top there, we've got increased commitment to the organisation. So if your employees are feeling intrinsically motivated, they're getting joy and pleasure out of doing their work, etc., they enjoy being there and so on, they're committed to the organisation, they're likely to be more loyal, they're likely to stay and stick with you because, they see that vision, they agree with it, it really holds true to their own sense of meaning and purpose. And so you'll see with a happy employee, positive effects on the financial bottom line. And similarly, what he argues is with improved productivity as well as another outcome from employees who are feeling happy at work, and also they will look for ways to explore new ways of working together, new ways to solve problems. So you get this cycle of continuous improvement within the organisation as well, which again will lead to positive financial outcomes for the organisation. Excuse me. What he does say as well in terms of the field of performance excellence and so on, he sort of talks about what would be a good lead indicator, really, if you wanted to look at non-financial metrics. So looking at things which aren't related to the financial bottom line, like profit and so on. And he basically goes on to say that employee commitment from all the research that's been done is really the lead indicator that should be used by organisations. Now, that's probably no surprise to some of you, because through his model, etc., it shows that if you have that highly engaged, happy employee, then you'll get all those financial benefits. And just finally, he also makes it very clear that spiritual well-being can't be manufactured. It's not something that you can just construct and think, okay, let's just go and have, happy, employees, etc. He's very much about you really need to have that that spiritual practice, the inner life that I had on the previous slide, and because basically the inner life sits at the heart of it. And it's interesting because in the other article we reviewed by Brown, who talks about what are the characteristics or attributes of some of the great sustainability leaders, it basically found that all of them had something, well, a few things in common, and it links back to the inner life, in that all of them actually did practice some sort of reflective way of thinking, and what they found from that is they were able to listen to this inner voice, which you obviously get from those reflective practices. And often they were able to actually access intelligence or answers and wisdom, which didn't really come from IQ and EQ. So they were getting sort of answers and ideas about how to design sustainability initiatives, ways to solve problems, basically, from this other arena, which had nothing to do with our normal, rational and emotional intelligence. So that rang true as well with the work we did in Brown. So it really allows that inner wisdom to come through, which is used to help solve those problems of complexity. Okay, that's probably all I have time for now. I'll just hand it back to Gianni on to take that whole model further, actually.
Thanks, Anna. So as Anna mentioned there, I mean, the whole application of SQ to leadership links almost directly to the workplace as well and organisations. And so in the final part of the Knowledge Connect, as I said, where we look at the application of SQ and some of the tools that have been used to apply SQ in the practical sphere, one of the key areas is the workplace. And probably one of the most, I guess, powerful, and again, it's another illustration of the simplicity of some of the tools, but again, some of the profound transformation that they can lead to, is the work by Lips Viesma on the map of meaning. And this comes originally from a PhD thesis, which then she worked on for over 15 years, to the point where it's now been validated through psychometric testing. But what's become known as either the holistic development model or the map of meaning model. And again, this is a tool that can be used, they suggest in the book, and have worked with at an individual level. So again, what Anna was referring to is that inner practice, that work on yourself first as a leader, but then also applying it to teams within the workplace or to the broader organisation. And the model is, as it represents there, has these 4 quadrants. What they found is that there are 4 main ways or spaces within which we as people make meaning or try to get sense of the world around us. And they're split up into developing the inner self, unity with others, service to others, and expressing full potential. But the interesting thing about this map of meaning is that there are these 2 dimensions that are pulling at either end of the spectrum. So at one end, if you like, we have a dimension of presence, and that is we're often torn between our being, that is our inner self, and that is time for self-reflection, and the pressures to be doing, okay, to be acting, okay, to be fixing problems, to jump in and solve things. And on the other spectrum is the tension between ourself, okay, so developing our inner self or expressing our full potential through things like our creativity, through things we achieve, whether at a personal level or at work, and others, okay? So our relationship, working together with others in teams, the kind of shared values, belonging, the valuing of diversity and so on, and also service to others, okay? And in the middle, of course, then this is all bounded between what they refer to as inspiration, which for some people might be their faith, for others it might be a humanistic view of the world, and our reality, okay? So we all have these ideals that we'd like to live by, but then often we're confronted with the actual reality either of our personal situation or the reality of our workplace or the reality of the organisations that we're in. And what they've found, so what the book does is it provides the grounding to the model, and then it provides case studies and examples of organisations and teams that they themselves, as well as other people who use the model, have worked with to show the kind of powerful transformation that can occur when you use something as simple as this to enable people to express meaning and what is meaningful for them. So one of their key points is that it's, and often what happens in organisations is you get, the CEO or the senior management team come down and this is our vision, these are our values, and then it's tried to get, push down the organisation. The implicit thinking behind this model is that no one has a hold on meaning. Meaning is relative to everyone. And if you don't give employees the opportunity to express what is meaningful for them and what is valuable to them, and what this model can do is it enables that discussion to take place in ways that are non-conflictual, not about faith or religion or spirituality in that explicit way, but it gives people that first idea around what is it that gives me a sense of meaning. And so the book has then got a whole series of exercises that you can do in each one of these quadrants. So for example, in the last 2 weeks at work, think of what was something that you did, for example, that enabled you to develop your inner self, okay? That enabled you to grow in terms of what you did. And again, it's applied to all levels of occupations, okay? From call centres to knowledge workers across the spectrum. The same ideas apply. And often what you find is, and you might be starting to think this yourself, is that we're often, one of the exercises says, what percentage of time would you say you spend in each one of these quadrants? Okay? And the key behind the model and the key behind feeling that you have and you are in a space of meaning at work is to be in balance. Okay? So if you're pulling too far on one side, then you're going to be out of balance and you're going to be having those kinds of feelings of meaninglessness at work. So the whole idea of the model is to enable people to see that it's about the balance that's important. I'm mindful of time, so I'll just move on, and I'm happy to come back to this during discussion. And then the third example is around is the social impact area. And the work that we reviewed here is Adam Kahan's work on transformative scenario planning. And again, Adam is probably familiar to many of you at CSI. He launched his book at CSI recently. But one of the things that struck me when rereading his book was that, again, it's an example of, he doesn't use the word SQ, but if you look at the model, and in this case of Kahan's model, it's around solving tough, wicked social problems or environmental problems, usually at a national level. Okay? So we're giving you examples of a map of meaning which can be applied at the self-workplace level to another tool of transformative scenario planning which applies at a much more macro level. And if you, and these are the 5 steps, again it's on page 9 of the Knowledge Connect, the 5 steps that Kahan outlines for transformative scenario planning. And as I said, it is replete with those principles of spiritual intelligence, the principles of holism, the principles of emergence, the principles of systems thinking. So the idea of convening a team from the whole system, okay, is ensuring that you have a group of people from completely different sides of the spectrum in that team that is addressing a particular problem. And it is that process of working with that team to enable them to observe what the others are observing. So it's EQ, but then it is beyond EQ. And that is one of the key differences between IQ, EQ and SQ. And that is that IQ and EQ work within the boundaries of the current system. SQ is about changing those boundaries. It is about being able to step outside of those boundaries and come up with solutions that you had never thought of before. And in many ways, it's similar. For many of you I know are in the philanthropic space. There's been a lot of discussion recently around collective impact. Okay? And one of the interesting things around collective impact, particularly for funders, is that it's not around funding a solution. It's around funding a process. It's around funding a framework. It's around funding a way for people to be able to talk together, often from different sides of the fence, to address these kinds of wicked problems. And so Kahan uses the idea of the U borrowed from Otto Scharmer's work on theory U to illustrate this idea of this team then going through this process of observing with different eyes to be able to construct stories about what could happen, not what should happen or not what will happen. It's not about forecasting, but it's around trying to get people to think around what could happen, and then that leading to this co-creation process of people then saying, what do we need to do, and then acting to transform the system. It's a very quick and crude summary, I know, of quite a... but again, what struck us about these models is that, in essence, they are simple, but in implication, they are profound. And so that leads us to some concluding thoughts. I know we've already gone way over time. And that is, what are the implications of this? And we've tried to kind of, I guess, summarise this and say, SQ has some pretty important implications, we think, for personal growth, okay, for individuals in terms of their own personal growth, for leadership, as Anna spoke about, for corporate responsibility, okay, so for that organisational level, the workplace, and also for social impact. And so one of the key questions is, well, how do we cultivate it? If we're all spiritual, and so we're saying that we've all got different levels of spiritual intelligence, then a key question then is, well, how do we increase our spiritual intelligence? How do we get people to be thinking or use this kind of intelligence in their daily life? And I guess from an organisation like CSI, what are the implications for education and training? So Centre for Social Impact, for example, we have a graduate certificate we get people who are emerging leaders from the social sector, from the corporate sector, from government sector. Where is the SQ in how we are educating these emerging leaders? What is it that we need to do? And I guess one of the things that comes out from all the work that we've reviewed is that a lot of SQ work is experiential. It's not what we're doing now. We're still in the head space. Okay, we need to get out of our head space and move into the heart space and the interrelationship between head and heart. So how do we do that in our education, in our courses, in workshops, in leadership training? And I guess this is a very simple and just some key points that we'll throw out to leave it open to discussion. Clearly, things around critical self-reflection are crucial. Contemplative practices like meditation and so on. Being clear around our calling and our purpose, at both an individual level and an organisational level. Okay, we see that all the time. Rites of passage is another interesting one. Again, rituals. There's been some interesting work done at Harvard recently on the importance of rituals, believe it or not, to marketing. I believe, and we believe, that rituals and things like rites of passage, in terms of stepping out, Marissa made reference earlier to the Indigenous communities, around that is the way that we can access and start to cultivate our SQ. These are not easy challenges, but I think they are critical challenges. And if, as we believe, SQ is the intelligence that we need for purpose, meaning, and achieving true social impact, okay? And I think the work over the last 10 years is I think we're at a tipping point. I was saying to Marissa, it's interesting that this is the first Knowledge Connect that booked up so quickly, she tells me, and also had a huge waiting list. And a couple of years ago, and I wouldn't say struggled, maybe it had something to do with the language, but there was interest, but it just wasn't, we're not at that tipping point. And we're kind of feeling now that we're kind of getting to this tipping point. And so we need to then start to think, well, okay, how do we cultivate it? How do we bring it into the work that we do? So I'll leave it there and open it up to questions and discussion. Thank you.